and welcome back to another episode of Over the Glass and our special edition of covering Heated Rivalry. First of all, we want to give a huge thanks to all of the views and downloads that we received on our first episode. It's just been truly overwhelming and just the best thing ever because, Ness and Ness is here with us today. We started this podcast. This is our fourth season, and I feel like this is everything that we've been leading up to. It's please give us some queer hockey to talk about and not finding the little morsels here and there in the hockey world, but it's legit, we get to talk about queer hockey. And then on top of that, thank you for suffering through our audio technical difficulty from the first episode. We have cleaned that up. I'm Jay. I'm one of the hosts for Over the Glass podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Ness, and we have our guest hosts, Fil and Elena, joining us here today. So, episode 3, we get a shift in the narrative a little bit. We get to cover Scott Hunter and Kip Grady in this dedicated episode to these guys with a this is from the first book in these series. And so we start out with going back to February in 2014 during the Sochi Olympics. The episode opens up and we are back in Sochi, and we see Scott Hunter and Vaughn from Team USA as they spot Shane in the Olympic Village. So if you recall from episode 2, we kind of see it from Shane's perspective. He's trying to contact Ilya. He's not getting any response. And then out of nowhere, his teammates show up, and so they enter this scene. We get to the same scene where Vaughn once again assumes Shane's friend Joe might be gay and calls him brave for being out, saying Russia is not safe for folks like that. This time, the focus is on Scott Hunter, the way that he reacts to this discussion or lack thereof. It's more just Vaughn just saying whatever he feels, and Shane and Scott are like, yep,
whoops,
cool beans, man. And then this scene ends with pushing on Scott as he appears deep in thought. And then before we cut over to where this leads us, let's get a feeling for this opening of episode 3.
I think it's interesting that they sort of go back and we get to see that scene again, but from a different perspective. Another, not out character sort of dealing with, and in his situation, it's his actual teammate. That, those sort of microaggressions, or that kind of, obviously, even if it's not ill-intended, Vaughn sort of steps in it by making assumptions about this figure skater, and he, he lives in a society where those kinds of assumptions, he doesn't feel hurts anyone, but we are kind of seeing the fallout of that with in this episode, obviously Scott, who has to grapple with that. And I like that it's sort of ambiguous as to, in the scene that we saw last episode, you kind of go oh, he might not, he looked a bit awkward about that pronouncement. But in this episode, obviously, the way it cuts, we kind of get a sense that, maybe he's got more on his mind.
After the end of the episode, we see everything he has in his mind. It's going back and forth with this point in time.
Yeah, Fil, I like what you said in our previous recording about how the way that Vaughn is saying this stuff, he's he thinks, oh, I'm amongst bros who will, you get what I'm saying. If you're in figure skating, you're a little and that's just the assumption that is made. It's the learned behavior, but he doesn't see that in terms of, oh, but if you're a hockey player, you're straight, you're this masculine man, and he's sitting at this table with 2 gay guys, and he just doesn't even realize it. just the way that he moves along and doesn't even skip a beat is just very telling in this scene. And even though Scott and Vaughn, you can see them in the beginning of the episode, they're just chatting away, they're hanging out, they're like, best buds. But we've talked offline about how, Vaughn is, he's someone that you can kind of, at the end of the day, I think he is moldable to realize that what these certain things that you're saying are homophobic. Not to say that you are a homophobe, but it is kind of very hurtful to have these sort of thoughts and then projecting them out to people, because it does give a vibe off of you that like, you may not be as accepting of me, and I need to take some time to consider if I'll ever come out to you, which is a difficult thing when it's like you're friends. And as we see later on in this episode, just what Scott is grappling with, that makes it so difficult for him to be out with Kip.
I just
wanted to say in regards to I just wanted to say in regards to exactly what you were talking about is that even when you in the previous episode, we see that, Vaughn is supportive of this and he doesn't have an issue with this. He never really understands the effect it has on them. And obviously for Scott, I think one of the things that he reacts to in this conversation is the fact that, obviously one, the assumption that there are no, gay hockey players, but also I think two, the fact that, like once again, could there ever be? Because there's this strong assumption from people around him that would just not be acceptable, that's like unthinkable. And I think that sort of really sets up the whole episode.
Definitely.
I went back in the book to read about Carter Bond, and it's funny because there are a couple of points where Scott really wants to come out to him, because he says he has never seen anything homophobic about him, and he's sure he would be a good ally and he would support him. But it's kind of different, on the series. But he's got this arc, Carter as character.
So after this, we hard cut over to 4 months ago in New York City. There's a voiceover from Man in the Crease podcast. The hosts are talking about the Admirals and its captain asking what has happened to Scott Hunter and comparing his strong game last season with the 0-point scores during his current season, which is supposed to be a need to win. We see that Scott's out running along the streets of Manhattan, and we continue to hear the host criticizing Scott's performance. He stops and he pulls out his earbuds as they're mentioning that he's made Team USA captain of the Olympics. So first of all, my thought is, God, I hope none of these like NHL players are listening because please don't listen to our podcast, Sharks player. And we're not even that, okay, maybe for Klingberg. We're not that, we tend to like be, we try to remember that they're human, but like the amount of pressure that especially just the average guy already has, I can only imagine he's the captain of this team. Every team wants to win in any league that they're in, and he's like, getting out on the streets and jogging, and and he's listening to this stuff. I'm like, that's a lot of pressure on you.
Masochistic.
Yeah, I wanted to say, obviously not directly related to hockey, but I loved the use of sort of diegetic and non-diegetic sound in this scene. Because as we're out running, we're obviously hearing the voiceover, but it's not necessarily clear that he's listening to it as well. But then obviously as they start criticizing his play, we see him react to that. And then, it kind of moves into a more sort of like the music is actually with him, like he's listening to that conversation. And I just think that, yes, it's a clever bit of showing where he's at but also setting up the stage for what, has been his not a good play season. And, I think that it's interesting because obviously, like you say, hockey players, they grapple with that all the time. I'm sure that, you can't always, you're not always winning. And so what does that feel like when you're playing as well? And, maybe you're not having the best season and, how do you wind down or how to stay on top of your game?
What you were mentioning about the podcast host talking about or criticizing him, we're listening, whatever. And then as he's ripping his earbuds out, it just cuts off. And I was like, I was listening to that. What's happening? But then it transitions. I wanted to hear about what more
shit they're saying.
All right. But then it transitions into the next scene. And then you're like, okay, well, now I'm seated. Like I see what's happening.
Which is also a way to make us realize how frustrated he is with everything. That is just okay. I can't listen to this anymore.
So then he's outside of the juice bar called Strawberry and Berry. He goes in to order and finds a guy with a name tag Kip asleep at the register. My guy, what are you doing? Wake up. He's cradling an art history book. Scott wakes him, and a flustered Kip apologizes while clearly checking Scott out, and they fall into this easy back and forth flirty banter. Scott asks for a recommendation, and Kip suggests the Blue Moon over Brooklyn with added banana. And so I just want to make the point that I started reading The Long Game in anticipation for this episode. I didn't get particularly far, but I did get to, this whole interaction. And in that moment, I went, wait, I didn't read that there was banana. And I went, no, okay. No, I see what you did there.
Visual storytelling.
Banana with blueberries. Scott makes a point of saying Kip's name when asking for his order. We see them silently checking each other out, eyes briefly meeting. Scott compliments the drink. And when he pays Kip, Kip protests that Scott tipped him too much, and Scott says it's for the great smoothie, and thanks again, Kip, as he heads out. So Kip turns around and making a shocked face at his colleague Maria, who returns the face with a girl. Another customer walks through the door and asks if that was Scott Hunter, the hockey player. We get another girl from Maria.
Maria's the best. Maria is such a great character.
Yeah, I got really giddy during this scene. I was like, what's happening? This is so cute.
I mean, it really is like a meet cute. Yeah, it truly is. And it's funny because like when you're watching it, Scott is not subtle. Like he's like embarrassingly like, but I get it. Like in that moment, especially if you're in Kip's position, you're like, well, I'm, you're in this service industry, you're just trying to do the thing. And, hey, maybe it's just a polite customer. Like, I don't know, like he's just being really nice. And then Maria kind of becomes this sort of, she's seeing this. She's like, no, that was something else.
Can confirm that is what was happening. So then we cut over to they're in a sports bar, which I think we can quickly deduce that it's gay related. The Admiral hockey game is playing on the TV at the Kingfisher bar. We find out that Kip has made the bartender Carl put it on. His friends Sean, Maria, and Kyle tease Kip about this, as well as the fact that Scott called him by his name twice. Sean says this is setting the bar so low, but when Scott scores a goal, they are all impressed, telling him to go for it. We also find out that Kip is working a lot while applying for grad school. So a couple of takeaways from this for me was, if you guys looked at the screen of who they were playing against, because I noticed that they were saying like Anaheim, I zoomed in. Is this the Anaheim Hammerhead Sharks? Because I'm offended. I am legit offended, okay? Do not merge our teams together. I'm gonna write a strongly worded letter to Mr. Jacob Tierney. You need to come on out to these parts. And then
there's
Sean.
And there's also that clip with Shane. Isn't it there? You can see Shane.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Oh yeah. The commercial. Yeah. Oh my God. Oh my God. So I love the banter. You could tell that Kip's friends are, they love him a lot. It's a great, tight-knit group. They're trying to figure out what this interaction was. He's trying to play it off. He's like, oh, he just said, like, Kip. He didn't actually say, like, my real first name. and when they realize, like, this is something that Kip should pursue, I love how he's like, oh no, he's probably straight, and Sean's like, no, we're gonna make him gay.
And Maria's like, no, he's not. Yeah, it does. It's a great scene to set up so many different things. We get a sense for like his economic struggle with Sean sort of saying that, you're working so much. And, you get a sense that, we know his goals, like he wants to get into grad school, and then also, yeah, like you say, the banter, it's so sweet. You can immediately right off the bat tell what kind of dynamic they have in the group. And yeah, it's fun. It's funny.
We also meet Kyle. Kyle is the protagonist of the fourth book. Kyle's also one of our boys.
So at Strawberry and Berry the next day, Kip is reading about Scott's success. Scott walks through the door and greets Kip, again using his name. Kip points to the paper and asks if he's Scott Hunter. They once again flirt, and Scott reveals his pregame superstition. When something goes right with his game, I've got to repeat it, and then I got to try to perfect it. Scott once again tips Kip, who protests, and Scott says he hopes to see him next game. Kip and Maria lose it after Scott has left. We're back at the bar again. Kip's friend Elena joins him in the booth, and they discuss whether Scott was really flirting with him. Elena figures out that the Admiral's next home game is the following Saturday and tells Kip to plan for his next shift so he can be working when Scott comes. On Saturday, we're back at the Strawberry and Berry again. Kip is on his phone while Scott comes in after the run. Scott is flustered but pleased that Kip is working. This time, Kip gives Scott the blue moon over Brooklyn on the house and refuses any tip, and Scott asks if he can drink it there. We see that Kip's looking at his checking account and an art history application before looking over at Scott with a wistful look on his face. Some time passes. Kip asks if Scott is worried about breaking his routine. Scott reassures him that he's not that kind of obsessive, that they have another easy back and forth. And I do want to like get people's thoughts on the whole. He went into like serial killers and street killers. I'm like, what are you alluding to, man? like if this is like your way of like picking up on this guy, I mean, Kip's all for it, but I'm kind of like, what is this getting at? Are you trying to warn him, like, don't get close to me?
I know that like true crime and serial killers are, all the rage. I don't necessarily understand it myself, but clearly Scott is a fan.
A fan and an expert.
I thought it was interesting the difference in which they were describing, like, oh, serial killers, they go after multiple different people versus, he was saying, oh, I don't even know if I could be a spree killer, which is just like multiple people at the same time. And I'm just like, this is a very interesting conversation going on right now. But as mentioned, Kip seems very into it, all to the point where he says, they all look like hot lumberjacks with beers at the end of the playoff season. And there's this clear awkward pause because Kip, if Scott didn't already have the vibe, like it's definitely been confirmed that Kip swings his way.
it's so funny because it feels like Scott has just been coming on it, onto him pretty clearly. And I feel like it's that moment where Kim actually returns the gesture by sort of flirting very overtly back. That Scott's almost like a deer in the headlights. He doesn't know how to, like, oh, shoot. Wait, what are you saying? And that's really funny to me. It's like that thing of like, sure, you can flirt, but the second you get, a return of favor, you're like, oh shit, what now?
I've gone in too deep. Need to come up for air. And I also wanted to point out in his whole trying to convince Kip that he's not the usual hockey player that has all these superstitions. Then he goes into the whole, but it's different in the playoffs. It's like science-based. And I said, okay, yeah, you're definitely superstitious. Like, what does the playoffs have to do with science? Everyone like always make this big deal about it. It's like, oh, but it's the playoffs. It's a whole different game. Like, on one hand, yes, because the stakes are much higher. But bro is like, oh, there's a science behind it. I was like, shut up.
And maybe it's an excuse to do it. Also, exactly, but he's totally like, oh, like, yeah, we totally believe in science. You wouldn't understand that because you're into art. But then you're also like him going like, don't ask any questions. Don't worry about it.
So finally, Scott breaks the silence by inviting Kip to come see his game that night. So we cut to Kip and Elena in the bleachers at the Admiral home game. Scott skates by multiple times, giving not so subtle salutes, which was kind of surprising to me a little. Yeah. Until Kip waves back at him, and yeah.
Yeah,
that's it.
Well, yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I was kind of like, you're not very subtle. And sure, there's a girl sitting next to him, so maybe you're like, well, people, if there aren't any reaction shots, or I don't know how the cameras work in hockey if they actually do any bleacher shots. But I'm just like, yeah, sure. If anyone sees it, maybe they could assume that it's he's waving to Elena, but he's just so not subtle about it. Like 3 passes, and Elena's like, dude, Kip, you have to wave back. Kip's like, no, he's not waving to me. And it's like, my God, these two guys, they're just so oblivious.
I think some of it also has to do with the, like, this can't be real. This is a hockey player. Why is he giving me attention? It feels like too good to be true type situation. And like, in Kip's defense, it's like, I don't.
It's fair.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't know if I should play into it or not because it's such a different world, and also it's unbelievable, because again, like you said earlier in the episode, like people assume that all hockey players are straight. Nobody talks about any queer folks in the sport, so
definitely. This is why we all need someone like an Elena being like, no, that's what that means. I can confirm. Yes.
This way.
So Boston, 2 days later, the Admirals have just lost a game against the Boston Raiders. They're both the teams are being shown exiting the ice. Then and Scott Hunter's on one side and Ilya Rozanov's on the other. Ilya is saying, I love you, and fist bumps all his teammates as they leave the rink. And Scott is distractedly fist bumping his teammates as they do the same. Ilya starts taunting Scott, saying, "It's too bad that you can't play at home every night, right? It's better for you, huh?" To which Scott replies, "Go fuck yourself, Rozanov." And Ilya shoots back, "It's more fun if you're there," leaving Scott speechless. Love the chirping.
And that's why we love Ilya.
It's so true. And also, I don't know about you, Elena, but I feel like, I don't know, as a European, totally. I just feel like his sort of openness, and it's almost like you're disarmingly gay. Like, it's just like, now I'm just going to be very open about it in a way that almost like it turns it all the way around, where you kind of go, well, surely he couldn't be gay. Like, he's so secure in his, masculinity. He's so secure in sort of this banter. And I mean, in any, I would say, sport or any situation where there are a lot of men, a lot of that kind of banter happens. You know, unfortunately or fortunately, it becomes sort of a very like a homosocial situation. And so, you know, it doesn't necessarily say that Rozanov is comfortable with people knowing that he's gay. He's just like that. It's just part of the banter, and he's just kind of leaning into that. Whereas you can see on the other hand, you know, Scott is just, you know, kind of like shell-shocked by it almost, like not quite knowing how to parse that level of directness, especially directed at him at the end.
It's provocation. It's just provocation. Ilya is the master of provocation. He knows what to say in which moment to just do the most harm possible.
But I'm not sure that like we're to understand that he thinks that Scott is gay in that moment, though. I mean, it is just play banter. No Would you say, or I don't know? I
think he has no idea.
He's just an ass.
I would say so as well. Yeah, Ilya's just being Ilya. Yeah. He's looking for, you know, we know that he's cocky. They've obviously beat Scott's team, and he's just reaping the rewards. Yeah, I don't think it necessarily means that he's showing Scott that he's aware of anything. However, in Montreal one day later, the Admirals have just lost a game against the Montreal Metros. Scott is out on the ice. Shane skates over and taunts him with, "Hope next time we play, you decide to show up." Scott calls it cheap, and Shane is starting to sound like him. Which Shane is just like, "What did you say?" And then we cut to the TV. We see Hollander and Hunter are being pulled away by his teammates and the officials, with the commentator saying how rare it is to see these two fight. And I have 2 points to make on this.
Of course, yes.
Only two.
One, just two to get started. One, I love. Okay, one A. I love the chirping once again. I love a good chirp. And then 1B, the way that Scott is like, "You're starting to sound like him." I was like, I know this is probably a chirp, and this is just, you know, guys just say shit to get each other riled up. But I was like, is he clocking him right now from like the Vegas scene where Shane was like, "My what? Huh? I have no association with this boy you speak of." Like, you know what I'm saying? Like I know I've been in spaces where you're trying your best to like not appear as you are. You're trying to cover it up, but like, gay eventually sees gay.
Gay on gay violence.
I think
really, and Scott is in his head where he's so frustrated that I'm just like, "Oh, you're being a dick." You're like, "No, I see you."
I think the actor was asked on an interview, Arnaud, I don't know how to pronounce his name, and he said Scott has no idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
Francois.
It's just, he's got no idea about what's happening between Ilya and Storrie.
Exactly. But that's the thing, though. You know, like he has just been coming off of a game, experiencing that, and obviously he knows that they're rivals, right? And so he's like, "Oh, you're starting to sound like this guy." I don't think he's talking about it in a like, "You too." I think he's just like, "Man, you're an asshole. Like, you seem to be like a, you know, nice Canadian boy, but like actually you're just as bad as Rozanov." Like I genuinely don't think that he intended it like that, but clearly, you know, we see that like Shane, he's also in his head in that moment. So he's just like, "No, you're coming at me. Yeah. Like gay on gay violence." But it's funny then because like, you know, and I think the commentators, they say like these guys, like that's rare. Like you don't see them fighting. And I think it's like, it really shows to you like how stressed Scott is, you know, with his bad game, you know,
and Shane.
And you also then see like how Shane is reacting to any idea of people knowing.
I was just gonna say, I wish that that it was him clocking him, like his gaydar went off, you know, like he knows, because then it's like Because okay, first of all, I should say I haven't read the books. I know nothing about this. And so I'm coming into this as a fan and like blindsided. So for me, I feel like it could set up a future relationship or something, right? Where it's not so lonely being in hockey. There's other gay folks in here that you can except not in this moment, obviously, because they're both like chirping at each other, and it's like not the setting for it. But
And
you know,
kiss.
But go ahead, Elena.
No, it's just in the book. This fight is in the book, but it's Scott punching Ilya. It's not Shane. They changed the fight, and
Right.
I wonder if it's just to show how
Tension.
Shane is so tense in his emotion that he explodes and tries to fight Scott, which is the first time he ever fights or something like that. I found it interesting, this change of
But
think
correct me if I'm wrong, but Shane is he in the first book at all?
yeah, I don't think so.
Because
I
I'm
haven't
wondering if
heard.
that's just a way of like tying it together. But I do love the idea though that you're kind of just seeing how the tensions can run high on the ice and people are dealing with things outside of the ice, and that kind of
Yeah.
sometimes seeps into it. Yeah.
I think he's on the book, but in a very small role. The only character that's permanently in all books being a really stark presence is Ilya. Ilya is like the main. How do you say?
Through line.
Understand me?
And then my second point that I wanted to make,
Oh, right.
when they started fighting, I was laughing out loud. I was just rolling because, with like 3 out of the 4 of us keep up a lot with hockey, and that's what, like, when I was seeing it, I was like, they are not fighting. Like, that is like playground kids. Like, I need to see some. But they're just like, hold me back, and I was rolling. It was great. I love the addition of it, but it's just amusing to me. Like, when we see fights out on the ice, it's like, oh, like they're not holding back. Versus Shade's like, I'm so mad right now.
I also love the cut from watching it live to watching on the television in the bar. I found it very, very funny. You leave the situation, and then the next one is like
It's a bit of clever storytelling as well. Once again, we're in that moment, and then like on the ice, and then we're with Kip, sort of reacting to that.
Yeah. So the following scene is we're in Kip's father's living room as they're watching the game. His dad mutes the TV. Kip quickly unmutes it again. They discuss Kip's catering gig the next day. So it's the next day, and Kip is clearly stressed about the gig as he runs around getting ready. The catering gig is at a fundraiser. He's in the kitchen. We see Kip run up to Sean apologizing. He is handed a platter of food, which he promptly walks out of the kitchen and straight into Scott Hunter while carrying it. He gets condescended to by Scott's lady company, while Scott, who realizes it's Kip, reassures him. So then Sean also reassures Kip, confirming that he knows Kip needs the money and that he wouldn't get fired. So later, Scott approaches Kip and asks if he wants to grab a bite somewhere else after. That lady, I'm not a fan.
I'm also
She's
wondering.
like, they're all just models now. I'm like,
thanks for the offhand compliment, I guess. Or backhanded.
I gotta say though that like in that moment, I was sort of thinking like, why are they hanging out? Like, is this another one of those fundraisers for like St. Thomas? Like, is this once again sort of Scott schmoozing to potential donors to get support for their scholarship? You really get the sense that he sort of has to, and he also says like she's a terrible person. But he just has to schmooze with a lot of nasty people that will talk down to, servers. But, it's a nice sort of just juxtaposition of like him he sees Kip, and even before he, I think, clocks that it's Kip, he's, immediately like, it's fine, don't worry, I've got another tux. And then, obviously when he clocks that it's Kip, he's like, trying to catch his eyes later to talk to him. But I think it's just a little lovely character moment of seeing that, like, Scott, he hasn't been pulled in by that kind of, nasty talk, like this lady, this socialite. Which I thought was sweet. He's not a snob.
I thought it was interesting that they decided to have, obviously for the story it makes sense that they run into each other at this event, right? But I feel like a lot of times when this is done, it feels very forced, like, oh, of course they're running into each other at this event because they have to keep the story going. But there's something about the way that it was done in this one that felt very natural, and I didn't question it at all. And I don't know if it was just because I was so invested in their story, because I'm like, oh my God, this is so cute. But it feels natural, it feels good.
I really find interesting this dynamic between both of them, because one is the server, the other one is the rich one who's going. This equilibrium that's always on the back of the head of keeps trying to maintain. Okay, but that's for later. That it's very difficult to have an equal relationship with someone who's so
when you're economically and different,
powerful and loved.
Yeah.
So later, Scott approaches Kip and asks if he wants to grab a bite somewhere else afterwards. So Scott's waiting outside the staff door, clearly uncomfortable. Kip comes out and they walk to the Mexican place Scott suggested. While the long line and lots of people, Kip notices Scott's discomfort. Scott suggests that they go to his place instead. I guess Scott, he, caught up in this moment thinking, oh, it's late in the night. Maybe we can have like a quiet sit down. He gets there and he's immediately like, oh, whoops. Like, there's no way I'm going into a restaurant with a bunch of people in there. Like, that is not what I'd planned to do. I just kind of wanted to like just have this moment between the two of us. So then at Scott's apartment, it's spacious and expensive looking. I think the additional context that I need to add here is that Kip is, he's kind of taking in this gorgeous apartment because, as you just mentioned earlier, Elena, about the economic divide between the two guys, like he's probably like rarely gets to be like, wow, this is crazy, this is so cool, and he's just like mesmerized by it. And then the camera goes from like Kip to what's going on behind him, and Scott's just, undressing, getting himself comfortable in his space, and to which the next scene is Scott saying, hey, do you want the tour now, or and
do you want the tour now?
I read that as the tour. I didn't read it any other way. This is the only option, the tour.
My 16 apps.
And I have to say, when this scene was playing out, where Kip's like, wow, this is so cool, turns around, sees this half-naked guy behind him, my jaw dropped. And I was just like, oh shit. And then when he's asking him, giving him the options, I'm thinking like, Kip, you better not answer this wrong.
He didn't hesitate. He said later.
He's like, no, I want the or. I want the or.
Which was so funny. Scott wasn't even, he was like, do you want the tour or? He's like, I'm not even going to say anything else.
There is no other option, but I'm giving you an out. So we see Scott go down, on Kip, and then we cut to Kip as he's getting dressed and about to sneak out to avoid waking Scott before his game the next day. Scott asks him to stay, and they go back to bed together. So Scott wakes again with a start, realizing that Kip is gone. We hear the sound of a smoothie maker in the other room. Kip is up making Scott's pre-game lucky smoothie. Scott seems more interested in Kip, though, as he hoists Kip up on his hips and carries him back towards the bedroom, asking if he can fuck him. So then we cut to them by the kitchen island drinking their smoothies. Kip says he should go, but Scott asks if Kip would be willing to stay. He says he's aware that he is too intense and asks if he can be too intense with Kip. He explains his situation about not being out and thinking of waiting until he's done with hockey and asks if Kip is okay being with him despite this. Kip says he thinks he'd love to.
I found this part interesting, also because like up until this point, you can tell Scott is like very lost in the moment. He's like really enjoying it. He's like he's living for it, right? Because he doesn't get to do this often. He explains to Kip that he's never brought anyone to his place before to do anything like this, which is like, oh, this is cool because you don't see this with athletes or whatever. And then he goes into this conversation about, by the way, I can't come out because of this and this and this, and explains this like how hard it would be for him. And hockey is very unforgiving when it comes to this sort of thing. So it's like very, como se dice, like double-sided and very polarizing in the sense that like you can tell he's really enjoying spending his time with Kip. He's really falling for this guy, obviously asking him to move in so quickly is crazy. and then being like, but here are the conditions. And you can tell that Kip is not happy with those conditions, but he's willing to give him a try because he's also falling for Scott.
I like the two shots that we get of Scott sort of waking in the night, because it is that thing where in the first one, Kip is he's trying to sneak out, and we get a sense that he, respecting Scott, he's sort of like, well, this was a hookup first off, and second off, I don't want to be here to cramp your style when you wake up. But then obviously Scott not wanting him to leave. And then sort of the second time he wakes up and he's like, oh shit, he did actually leave anyway. And then, obviously the reveal is that he didn't. And it's really sweet because, I think that the actor, he sort of, there's just this like lovely, subtle, like play on his face as he sort of, at first worries that, oh shoot, he left anyway. But then I agree with Ness because I find that, like, I think, was it Elena, was it you that said that some people have called it a bit like the lesbian Scott, he's like pulling up the U-Haul. Yeah.
The lesbianization of Scott on Kip. Yeah.
And, and I get it in a way because I think that it's, hard being, a gay hockey player who's not out. And, it is quite surprising, that he hasn't done any sort of clandestine, careful, hooking up, stuff in the past, but that also kind of goes to show that he's really mindful of his image and not getting caught out. But then also, obviously, when you finally meet someone that you actually really like, then he's like, I'm gonna, hitch my wagon to this. Like, I don't want to lose this. Like he says as well, he's like, I thought I could wait. I thought that, once I'm not playing anymore, maybe I could do it, but now I've met you and I just don't want to go back. And I mean, I don't know about you guys, but that is such a like experience, like not necessarily in relation to coming out, but just this thing of like holding back or not being honest about who you are. And it's almost like when the dam breaks, you have that moment where you're like, actually, I want to live authentically. It doesn't mean just because it happens so that you can, you're still living in the reality of the life that you have. However, the feelings have changed because suddenly you're like, how can I make it work though? Like, I don't want to live another day without it. And I think that, he is really intense. I mean, as a person who is definitely out and wants to continue to be. So I think that that's, like confronting for Kip. But I also think that he does understand, obviously, Scott's situation, and that must be very confronting because it's, like he's coming on really strong. But go for it, I guess.
It's just the only way they have to be together.
Yeah.
At this moment. It's just Scott is pulling Kip back into the closet, and we know he's living a completely happy out life with friends and a dad that supports him and looking for work. But he is asking so much from him. Just go back a little bit back, and let's see what happens. Yeah.
But it's also, I mean, on the flip side of that, there's this amazing moment for Scott where he's like finally able to be authentic with him.
He's so lonely, and he's so lonely. He finds someone to be with in his hometown, and not only in the summer flings and this and that, and you got this feeling that he is so lonely, and he really needs someone to be with him, but at what price?
Yeah, and I think on a personal note, I don't know if I'd be willing to jump that quickly into it. Like, you really have to like someone to be that okay with just saying, yep, like throw caution to the wind, let's go. But clearly they clicked.
Yeah.
And I also think that with Kip trying to search for like something that excites him. I mean, we can tell, he's living at his dad's place. He's trying to get into grad school. He's working at Strawberry and Berry. It's just like, I'm not saying that he's at a low, but it's definitely not where he wants to be. And then Scott, he's like, oh, he's successful with hockey, but he's missing that part where he, has someone he gets to come home to. And I think that is kind of why they get pulled to each other. We're just like, yes, this is what I've been searching for. And I think that's why they go so hard into it, which, the whole U-Haul lesbian approach to it and whatever. In the books, I think, it does take a little bit more time before he gets to that point. But I think for the purpose of the show and the way they've kind of framed it, I think it just, it just makes sense. It is like, whoa, what are you doing? But when you kind of sit down and think about it, it's like, yeah, they're caught up in the moment. They're thinking like, we can do it, screw all the things that have been like holding me down and making me anxious and whatever. Like, no, like I want this, and I'm gonna sacrifice everything to get there. But then as we see as the episode progresses, they're like, oh, reality starts setting in and such. So the music picks up as the montage begins. As Scott's place, Kip is studying. When Scott comes home from practice, Kip is talking to his dad about his application and reassuring him that he's staying at Elena's. Cut to another Scott and Kip having sex. So at the bar, Sean complains that Kip has dropped them for his boyfriend, while Kip tells them Scott is just a customer. Okay. What services is he paying for? He's not my boyfriend. I don't have a fucking boyfriend. No one believes him. Obviously. Terrible liar, Kip. We cut back to Scott and Kip having sex. Definitely not a boyfriend. Scott walks into Strawberry and Berry, disappointed as Maria is at the counter. Come on, Maria. Kip clears his... Stop actually working. I need to flirt. Kip clears his throat and takes over. They are not exactly subtle. Maria calls it out in Kip frames of ignorance. Maria here is like another banana. Oh my god. Oh, I do want to point out in the scene where, they're showing the bit of like the honeymoon phase. Oh, Scott gets to come home. Kip's waiting for him.
It's so
it's
cute.
just like the perfect. It's the dream that they have. That they're like, yes, it's exactly what were we even concerned about. Scott's in the kitchen and Kip's in the living room. There's pasta salad, in the fridge. There's chicken with no feta, and I'm like, he knows how he eats as a hockey player. And just like these little subtleties,
so romantic.
His coffee's made for him. He's just like the wife that Scott's dreaming of, like coming home to every day, or in this case, the husband. It's just like everything that anybody should ever, hope to have. so Scott comes over. He's just, infatuated with the fact that like Kip's made coffee, knows what he needs to eat for, to maintain his sports physique and prepare for games. And Kip is looking at one of his favorite artists' art, and Scott suggests he should buy some. So the montage fades away at the art gallery. Scott is in sunglasses and a cap, visibly jumpy and uncomfortable being out and potentially seen. Kit's chatting about the art, but gets hushed by Scott when he mentions that one of the pieces would look great in Scott's living room. Scott apologizes, and Kip, sensing his discomfort, suggests that they could leave. The gallerist comes over and talks with them, but Scott gets overwhelmed and rushes out. I think it's also important to point out that the gallerist was clearly like, oh, these two are a couple. And Scott's like, no, too much, too soon, blah, blah, blah. They go back to Scott's place. Scott is clearly distraught and apologizes for not being ready, and Kip holds him. Like, yeah. We're starting to see that the dream,
The cracks
the
in the
honeymoon,
facade.
yeah, it starts coming down, the realization that Scott cannot just go out of this apartment with Kip and look at art, a very, like, chill thing to do. Because people are going to assume things. They're not going to be able to have conversations like they do in his apartment. And we see really just one of these many moments where Scott realizes, like, this can't happen. Like, what am I doing?
Credit to Scott. He did try, like he did put himself in a situation he knew that was going to be uncomfortable for him and wanted to see if he could do it. He couldn't. And then, like, it sucked for the both of them in very different ways, and you could see that. But this is also where you start to see Kip coming to the realization, like, oh, I don't know if this is going to work because of this.
Honeymoon phase is over.
Mm-hmm.
It's everything very fast, very fast, very fast. Move
A few
together.
months.
Yeah.
So Kip drops an application in the mailbox as he turns around. A pair of novelty socks catches his eyes. Scott is packing for an away game road trip and asking if Kip would mind him getting smoothies from someone else. What if you always kind of had one with you? Is what Kip presents to Scott. Kip has gifted him the socks that look like the smoothies, and then they fuck.
Because why wouldn't they?
Why?
I love you. Wow. We see Scott putting the socks on in the hockey locker room, and he takes a photo of the socks. At the bar, Kip is watching the game, cheering as Scott scores another goal, and the commentator suggesting that Scott's away curse is broken. Elena turns off the TV, demanding that Kip admit that he's in love with Scott. She presses him, worrying that he's forced to hide their relationship, and Kip says he's happy. Even though his dad probably thinks that he's fucking a married guy, and asks her to be happy for him too. She deflects by saying she looks forward to seeing him in a tux at the fundraiser, and Kip reminds her that Scott will be there too.
Can I just say, since you mentioned his dad quickly, his dad is such a sweetheart. He is so cute and very supportive and loving, and I love that for him because you don't get to see that in a lot of queer families.
They killed his mom, obviously. Apparently, I don't know. I'd like to know why. But in the book, he's got a mom too, and they are both very supportive.
Budget reasons, Elena. That's why they killed her off.
That's what I feel like it. Okay, I thought, like, maybe this could either be like a single parent household type of thing, or maybe, or divorce or whatever. But then there's a scene later on as we get to it where I did notice after my second watch through that the dad does still have the wedding ring on. So it does appear that some tragedy had happened in the family. So Kip gets the photo of the socks, and which says "My good luck charm" from Scott, who texts that there's a surprise for Kip in his closet. At Scott's apartment, Kip gets a phone call from his dad, who is relieved to hear from him. Kip asks if there's been anything in the mail, but his dad assures him that he will get it. They hang up, and Kip goes to open the closet to find a tux from Scott. which has a note that says, "For my man."
So cute.
I hate this scene. I can't, because in the book they have a huge fight over this tax because Kip doesn't want to take this tax from him. He doesn't want Scott to pay for his clothes, and he really wants to stay so independent from him. And this breaks this whole equilibrium that I was talking about, because he doesn't hesitate and takes the tax, and okay, that's it. I'm a paid for. I don't know. It's. I find it weird that they changed this from the books, because it was very clear for Kip that he didn't want this kind of gifts from Scott.
I think for the sake of the condension of the episode, I get what you're saying. But I also feel like they made a point of it already in the episode, and we're kind of sort of, we're expecting the audience to like have that in mind. We realize that there's an economic divide. I don't really like, personally for me, I don't really feel like we need to emphasize on it more. And I felt like in that scene where they're having this back and forth about the tux is also because Kip is concerned that if Scott goes to pay for the tux and be like, oh, just put it on my card, and it's like, don't you think it's going to be weird that I come in and be like, yeah, put it on Scott Hunter's tab? Don't you think that that's going to like, raise some eyebrows? So I think it is like another point in the book where they're trying to show us that like there is this concern in their relationship about being seen together. But then we also had that scene in the gallery that I think makes it like very obvious that that is an aspect of their relationship. But I do hear what you're saying. Like the change is like, well, he actually didn't want him to do that, but I think I'll give it a pass just because we need to move on to like the next scene where we realize like this is not gonna work. It's either you have to be clear to him about it, break it off because it's gonna be too much for him or whatever. So we're at the fundraiser for that evening. Kip is nervously drinking his and Elena's drinks. Meanwhile, Scott and Vaughn are chatting with Tom, who asks if Scott is playing better because he's met a girl. Vaughn quickly suggests that they've just found their groove, and Tom brings up Scott's dead parents. Scott really can't catch a break. He excuses himself and heads over to Kip and Elena and is still pretending that he doesn't know Kip. Like introducing himself, and I'm like, oh man, like, ugh. Elena calls out their blatant flirting and excuses herself to give them some space to talk. They both acknowledge that she knows about them. Scott says that he wants to leave after the speeches, but Elena comes back with drinks just in time to demand a dance with Scott first. During the dance, Elena presses Scott, saying that Kip shouldn't have to be a secret. The scene is intercut with shots of Scott getting into the cab after the fundraiser and it driving a bit further before picking up Kip. And she says, he deserves sunshine, and so do you. Oh, one point that I want to make about this is going back to how Vaughn reacts to, Scott. We learn that Scott's parents aren't with him anymore, and Vaughn can tell that it bothers Scott. And I did appreciate that Vaughn is like, "Hey man, are you okay?" So brownie points for Vaughn from me.
Yeah, and also how devastating. Yeah, how devastating when Scott then replies with, "I should get used to it by now," and you're like, No, Scott, you should not. Like, Tom, in that moment, I'm just like, shut up. Like, you're being so insensitive. And
I didn't mean this for you, Phil. I meant that for Tom.
Damn. Shut up. But yeah, no, it's just
Phil was like, damn.
Listen, I pick up on cues. Tom clearly doesn't. No, but it is one of those where I don't know if we're to believe that he is like part of the I assume he's part of the sort of St. Scott scholarship fund. He's one of the guys that has been supporting Scott, I imagine. but but it does feel like one of those moments where you just see that Scott is just suffering, like whatever they, like he's just having to play along because that's what he needs to do or he feels like he's indebted. He feels like he needs to do that because the scholarship has, obviously given him a chance, at least at life. But it's so sad because it's like once again, those microaggressions, those little jabs at who you are as a person where you can't live authentically. And he just has to accept it and take it. And obviously Vaughn, I don't think in that moment he knows. Like, I don't think that when he says, it's the team, we're gelling better. I don't think he's doing that because, like, he's doing it to support Scott, but he doesn't know what Scott's actually going through. And that's also like one of those points where you look at that and you go, I'm like so sad for Scott because he is carrying all of that on his own. And even when his friends and obviously his, colleagues are supporting him, they don't know. They don't know the inner turmoil. They don't know why he's reacting the way he does.
And at the same time, they are the only family he's got because now we know his parents are dead. And that explains also why he's so scared of losing hockey because it's everything for him. He's got no family, no girlfriend, boyfriend, no life outside hockey, which is
he does, but not one that he feels comfortable sharing.
Yeah.
Right. On the other side, I want to give kudos to Elena as a friend because she could see her friend hurting in this moment.
This Elena.
This Elena. No, the Elena in the show.
Lena's like, you're welcome.
When she asks to dance with Scott and she goes ahead and lets him know like her thoughts. Like, hey, you're hurting my friend. I can see it. This isn't cool. And in that moment I can see that maybe she doesn't think that Kip will speak up for himself because he's also kind of in this situation where he likes this guy and this, they're enjoying themselves to a point. And so she's speaking up for him, defending him. But I really like how she ended that conversation with, he deserves sunshine and so do you. It's not like an attack on Scott. It's like you both deserve to be happy. But right now you're hurting my friend, so I think you need to step off a little.
Right. Yeah. Definitely. So we're back at the apartment and Scott is making them drinks and they're talking about plans for Kip's birthday on Sunday. Scott has made catering plans, but Kip just wants to celebrate with his friends at the bar they always go to. It's a gay bar, more of a hockey bar now. He invites Scott along, saying that he could pretend to just be a friend. And Scott says he can't. He wants to tell everyone that he loves Kip, but he can't. Not for a few years. Ugh, that's where my heart went. Ugh. Like, just a few years.
I'll do it soon. Just a few years. And you're like, oh my God. Scott, no.
Kip pushes the drink away. He can't wait that long. He doesn't want to keep lying. He misses his family. He leaves, going home to his dad, and Scott is left alone in his apartment. And I also, going to what Nessa's point about the dad, his dad is like noticing, the emotional stress that his son is going through, and they have the scene where they're embracing, and Kip is able to just, put the weight onto his dad, even though, we, as I mentioned earlier, their family is going through something, whether it was like last week or, years ago, that's not something you easily, get over, a loss of a loved one, and they're just kind of there for each other. And that's also another point that, what Kip's like, I miss, my dad, I miss my family, I miss my support system. And I want you to be a part of all of this, but we have this like thorn in between us that we can't seem to get past. And now I'm throwing in the towel. I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. You can see they are so joined. Kip and his dad And his dad is a superstar. He's amazing as a character. And it's just breaking them apart. It's just they live in the same city and only communication is with the phone. Is really a stupid situation for them with the
Yeah,
partner.
Kip's gotten really isolated
Yeah.
throughout this.
He's almost so lonely as Scott at the end.
So the flashback to Scott's speech at the fundraiser, we find out that Scott lost his parents when he was 12 years old. Through the St. Thomas Scholarship, he was able to pursue hockey and find support and a family. It's clear that it wasn't easy for him and that he feels hugely indebted. Kip and Elena look uncomfortable in the sea of applause. We cut to the window at the Kingfisher bar where Kip's small group of friends and family are celebrating his birthday. We hear Elena declare, "Here's to turning 26 and a full fucking ride to grad school." And they all cheer. The camera pushes out and reveals that Scott is standing outside the bar looking in through the window. He walks away. We cut back to February 2014, the Sochi Olympics. We're back where the episode began. This time we're in the locker room. Scott is lost in thought, and one of his teammates tells him to get dressed for the gold fucking medal game. We see Scott cover up his smoothie socks with sports socks. The
visual
symbolism.
metaphors.
Is he hiding or protecting the socks? That's the question.
Could be both.
Yeah. It's sort of him, like obviously his private life and sort of the facade that he has to put on. I also think that like I love a good visual metaphor, and just honestly that shot, like when we start on that sort of wide of the window and it's sort of like a frame within a frame, we're seeing the Kip with his group of friends, and then as it like pushes out and you realize that Scott's standing outside, oh God, it hits you, right? Like that moment of realization that yeah, exactly. Because it is a moment where he could actually decide, you know what, caution to the wind, I'm going to go in and join them. But we see that he's not there yet. Like he's still outside and he's looking in, but now he really knows what he's missing. And it's such a heartbreaking reveal. And then, and I think I think it's just such a beautiful, moment of like contrast then with the socks. Cause it's like, on the one hand, he's left on the outside, but on the other hand, he has this thing that he keeps close to him. But at what cost? God.
Queer life, man.
Yeah.
I do want to pull in this article, this reference that I remember. I see it all the time in like memes. It came out in like 2020. Alexander Leon, an LGBTQ activist and writer in the United Kingdom. He went viral in a media post about how he found his identity, overcame the stigma attached to it. And you guys will probably be familiar with this quote that says, "Queer people don't grow up as ourselves. We grow up playing a version of ourselves that sacrifices authenticity to minimize humiliation and prejudice. The massive task of our adult lives is to unpick what parts of ourselves are truly us and which parts we've created to protect ourselves." And like, in like offline discussions, we talked about, is it clear the realization that Scott has that he's struggling with coming out because of the environment within hockey. But, as I think about it more, it's more than just the homophobia within really any sport, like even the ones that are like, here with queer folks, in various leagues and whatever, but that doesn't mean that it's eradicated. It doesn't mean that there still isn't this homophobia, this whether it's like more pronounced in those sports is another thing. But it makes me think about, then we have the part where you see his parents are no longer, with him. He basically owes his life to hockey, and that is his support system now. he is not only thinking about the fact that he is the captain of this team for the Admirals. He's now, 2 months later, he's going to be representing Team USA at Sochi. Like, we're going to talk a little bit about, the climate within Russia, and it just makes you start thinking, like, even if, let's say he plays on a Canadian team, let's say, like, Canada's like, yes, like, all the queers come out and play in our sports and whatever. Like, it could be, like, so, the cloud nine of ability to be out and proud, but sport is also international. And you see from, like, the previous episode where we see the shift in Ilya, the way that he's like, Shane's thinking, oh, it's fine. We're like, no, I don't mean, like, let's get it on. That's why I found you up in the drafters. I just want to talk. And Ilya is coming from perspectives like, we can't even do that. Get away from me. I'm going to do a quick ad read, actually, real quick. As you guys know, we are sponsored by DraftKings, the jaw-dropping moments that make hockey. Experience them all with the DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL. Missouri listeners, listen up. DraftKings Sportsbook is now live in the Show Me state. New customers, this one's for you. Bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code THPN. That's code THPN to turn $5 into $200 in bonus bets if your bet wins. In partnership with DraftKings, the crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort, Kansas, pass-through a per-wager tax may apply in Illinois. 21 plus age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Restrictions apply. Bet must win to receive bonus bets, which expires in 7 days. Minimum odds required. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/audio. Limited time offer. Copyright NHL 2025. All rights reserved. So we want to get into a couple of deep dives, just, to expand on some of the themes that we've seen through these episodes so far, and in consuming also the content around the actors and everything that led up to the creation of Heated Rivalry. And one thing that kind of like hit very close for us is the speculation of sexuality. So, Phil, if you could lay the groundwork for us on this topic.
Yeah, so during the press circuit, obviously the director and the actors have been going around being interviewed by different media outlets about just their work and the show itself. And there was, in particular, there was one interview where the interviewer sort of was asking about, the personal bleeding into the professional, and sort of an ongoing conversation that is, in fact, happening around queer people playing queer roles, which is, I think is a fair conversation to have. But, the interviewer then goes on to ask sort of, living, because this is a show that deals with living authentically and being open, and essentially is sort of steering the conversation into asking about the actors' own sexual orientations in relation to this project. And I think that Jacob Tierney in that moment, he sort of gracefully and artfully redirected the conversation by essentially saying, listen, as you'd hope in most workplaces, you're not allowed to ask, anyone, if you're casting someone, you can't ask their sexuality when they're reading for a project. And, ultimately, the only thing that you should gauge is the enthusiasm with which they come to the project and their willingness to do the work. And he just, essentially compliments both of the guys and then says that, they're here to do that. They're here to tell a story as authentically and as real as possible. And, they do a great job of that, which I agree with. And I think that like, it's such a complicated, topic, because I think that, as queer people, obviously, there is a certain, there's a certain hope that, you want to see yourself represented, right? Both in the media and, in the sports that you view, because that's so important when it comes to feeling free to live openly. But I also think that it veers into dangerous territory when you start speculating about people's private lives, especially when they're public figures who owe it to no one to disclose their orientation. And that goes kind of both ways, and I don't think that it serves anyone to speculate about that. If they are willing to and wanting to share that part of themselves, then of course they're free to. And I think that there's a strength in that. But I just think that it's so important. And we've seen this recently, especially with some really young actors coming onto the scene, being pride about their private lives in ways that can be extremely damaging, because, and that doesn't even, it doesn't necessarily have to do just with the queer experience. But I think that you're figuring out a lot of stuff, and to have to do that in the public eye, it can be so damaging. I don't know what are your guys' takes. What are your thoughts about this kind of interview and how Jacob handled that? And just sexuality. I should say the actors' sexualities. When they portray a character on TV.
I think he handled it as it's the only way a boss can handle such thing. His role there was kind of a boss of his two employees, and he was dependent in. I think he was perfect, no notes, and I agree.
I think also as a queer man, right? Like he. I think it meant a lot that it was him that stepped into that and kind of said, "Listen, we're not going to talk about that." Because if anyone should talk about that, it's him, because he has chosen to live openly with that fact. And so let's talk about how that's informed his work, for sure.
Yeah, I agree with you mostly. There's this yearn for queer representation on TV that you just can't force anyone to come out. It was really devastating when it happened to the actor of Heartstopper, because he was not ready.
Kit Connor.
Yeah. How old was he? 19, 20? I don't know. I hadn't even figured out anything at that age. I was still starting to think about me as an individual.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that, even if you want to try to understand it better, just like think about it if you're put into their shoes, like being, forced out of the closet when you're just trying to do the thing that you love. This is just a job for them, like not saying that that's how they feel about like, well, there's another one checked off the books, but it's still like you're going into the work environment, and you're not, you don't want to have people questioning like, well, if are you qualified in the way that you're a certain orientation. Like, you don't want to have to deal with that in your day-to-day life, so just kind of walk a little bit into their shoes. And I just feel like no one should ever have to come out before they're ready. And I do feel like, it is valid to be curious about it, because if you think back to, we grew up during a time where it's like we're really trying to like find representation in the stories that we're consuming, and then when it does arrive, it's like the worst side of it. It's like you see the queer person as the villain, or they are attached to the story but only to the main character story, and once their task is done moving that person's story along, then they get killed off, because it's like, that's the only reason the queer person needs to be around. And then when a story is centered around a queer person, it's all of like the traumas that we've had to face. It's like, oh, what a great story of showing like, triumph, even though they end up dead at the end. And it's like, so we go through this journey of like, geez, like I just want to see queer joy on the screen. And so we we go through all of this where we're improving the media that is being put out there. And now I feel like we need to start taking more of a turn of like focusing less on the traumas and more of authentic representation and things like that. And I do feel like queer creators, I do feel like they have a little bit of a responsibility to uplift other queer creators, but not in terms of like, well, the only people I'm gonna cast are like, you must be queer and you must be able to tell me that you are, and like, this and that, like, what are your qualifications type of thing. You hope that they are queer, but that's not any of our business. And like Jacob Tierney said, there's the enthusiasm from those guys, and at the end of the day, if they're coming in here, they're wanting to tell this story, and they're like, here, put me in any scene that you want. I'm here to do your bidding. Like that's what you want as a director, as a showrunner. It's like, yes, help me create this beautiful story, whether or not you're queer.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that it's so important to sort of to understand that there's a difference between, the telling of a story, which I think you're so right in. And I think that like having more queer voices telling those stories and doing it authentically. And like you say, not having to do the sort of deal with the constant misery porn of, we're just going to put, queer lives on display to tell a tragic story, or to sort of use that as a shortcut for dramatic effect, but actually have our stories being told. That has been such a massive shift, in our generation. And I think that one is so important, but I do not think that should come at the cost of the performers that do those things and that take on those roles. I mean, in the 90s, I remember there was huge discussions around, actors like Will Smith, turning down roles because they came at a cost because there was a queer character involved. And we do not live in that society anymore. There are, unfortunately, because we live in society and there are systemic problems, and there's a lot of rolling back of all sorts of rights right now, which are scary. And so it's important to tell those stories. But at the end of the day, it can never come at the cost of the safety and security of a human being within that. And so I'm going to be here championing for telling those stories and supporting the creators that do. But never at the cost of the individuals behind telling those stories.
I think to your point about having queer voices telling these stories, I feel like in this specific instance with Heated Rivalry, whether or not the actors themselves are queer, I think the fact that director it plays a huge part in this story being told in the right way.
Absolutely informs the story in a huge way.
Mm-hmm. I think it would have been way different if everyone involved was a cis straight white man,
And we've certainly seen shows like that, and it's very obvious to the queer community that like that is not done through the lenses of a queer person.
Yeah.
And it's very exhausting. But yeah, that for sure. Also, I was thinking about that in terms of like, telling queer stories. You have queer folks like in the writer's room, in the production. It just makes the story more authentic. And I do feel that if a cis het person is wanting to be part of creating these stories, that person has a responsibility to then hire on queer folks to help them create the story.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Okay, so still on the talk about queerness and representation, I want to change the discussion over to bivisibility and biphobia. So, Ness, if you could lay the groundwork for us on that.
So during these like pressers, the actor who plays Scott Hunter, is his name pronounced Francois? Arnaud.
No.
Someone asked this question. You came out publicly as bisexual in 2020, and you have been outspoken about the cultural invisibility of bisexual men in media and how that has contributed to pervasive and harmful beliefs and stereotypes about bisexuality. How are you hoping the way you choose to live your life publicly and kind of work you do will help dispel those harmful stereotypes? His response was, I'm not working actively to do that. I think that what I wanted to contribute was just being myself and disclosing and not hiding because it's easy. And if I was in a long-term relationship with a woman, for instance, it has been easy in the past to just not say anything about it. Being bisexual is not like going from one to another. It's not turning gay and then turning straight again. It's just part of your identity. I didn't know that he was openly bi, which is interesting, the contrast between his real life and the character he's playing.
Yeah.
I have seen him in a couple of shows before, like Schitt's Creek and I believe Yellow Jackets, where he does play a queer character. And I don't like the topic about bisexuality, specifically with men, because you have seen bisexual stories being told in media, but a lot of the times they're centered around women. And for whatever reason, it just seems more accepted between women than it is men, because like it's that misogynistic homophobia you see, right? Where it's like, oh, gay men, it's just like it's the worst thing in the world. And I specifically, I identify as bi. I know Jay also, or somewhere around there. I don't know what you guys identify specifically as. Is there anything like you guys have experienced in similar situations where where you feel like you've been there's like the biphobia, even like within the community, where there's just a lot of hate towards like, oh, why don't you just pick a side?
Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of internal stuff as well. I mean, I surely on my coming out journey kind of went, I'm attracted to all genders, but like that doesn't, it's like it was that classical queer egg journey of like you don't feel a part of the community because you're like, well, but I'm like not currently in a relationship that would be considered queer, so can I really put on the mantle of identifying that way? Like, am I just taking up space? Which is such a harmful way of viewing it. And I think that, to his point, I think that him being open about it on its own, like that is basically all that I would, like I wouldn't even ask that of him, because once again, if we're talking about, sexuality, there's no need to disclose. But the fact that he chooses to, I think, speaks to like a need. And I think you're right, especially with queer men. I think that there is a lot of pressure and a lot of prejudice around, how your sexuality is perceived. A lot of people say that, bi people are greedy, or, like you can't decide, or all of these terrible stereotypes
more
that are
prone
so
to
harmful.
cheat,
Exactly. And it's like, no, it's not that. And he says it really eloquently. I think it's just about being honest. Like, yes, I'm attracted to more than one gender. Like that is really all it is. It's, and I think that we have seen more and more recently in media, like positive portrayals of bisexuality. But I think that, if you look back at some shows that purported to be quite progressive at the time, there was these really hurtful ideas about bisexuality. And so I'm glad to see more people being open about it and feeling, comfortable talking about it. But I also love that we're seeing more positive portrayals in media as well.
I had a similar experience because I'm in a straight presenting relationship. It's like you don't exist, and you don't even know if you exist at some points. It's this, you're constantly questioning yourself: do I have a right to be with this group because I live this way? And how do I make myself present? And it's been pestering me my whole life, something I've been carrying with myself. And all of these stereotypes about bisexual people is just, come on, guy. I don't know what this idea that bisexual women are just horny and constantly looking for something is just, come on.
Do you ever find yourself almost overcompensating for the fact that you're in a straight passing relationship. Like you
Yeah.
you're like screaming to the world, "Hey, by the way, I'm queer."
That's what I'm doing here.
Yeah, I feel like so my girlfriend, I feel I can sense that with her. I feel like a lot of times when she tells me stories of her past, before we started dating, she only dated men for the most part. And a lot of the stories she tells, it feels like she was overcompensating for the fact that like she was only dating men, but she's always been queer, you know, she just never
Mm,
really
yeah.
explored that side of her. So it's just interesting to see people and like their journeys and stuff.
Oh, I want to touch on what Phil was saying about, the some of the bad examples of bisexuality and then the blatant biphobia in a lot of like early queer media. Like we are starting to turn a corner and having more positive representation, but as a whole, it is still very much a toxic vibe within our community, which is supposed to welcome us. Like where do we belong if straight folks are, don't understand us, and then this is supposed to be our family, and then our family is telling us, well, pick a side, like you're confusing
Yeah.
me, and then putting on their however they feel that we should be acting, because when I was starting to really come into the early stages of realizing that I wasn't straight, was around when like the L word was coming out. And I felt very, not only was L word incredibly like white, so already you're like, well, I don't belong here. And then it's on top of that, it's like, it's not until what, like season 4 when they have what's his face, Max, who ends up being a trans man who's coming out, and the way that they treat him, they ended up kind of like making up for it in the Generation Q reboot, but seeing that as a young queer person who's trying to figure out themselves, I was like, okay, I'm not a Shane, because Shane is very like out there, so that's not me. But Shane was the more mass presenting person. And then, so my next step is like Max, who just gets alienated by his entire friends group, and just the way that like they chuck him aside. I'm like, oh, this is feeling very positive for, being around lesbians. And then even the one bi person who was in the group, they even like, you know, they don't take her seriously either. And then it's only kind of like, they kind of lean into the, oh, they're gonna cheat on you, or they're just like promiscuous and whatever. So it's just like all kinds of like really bad juju, and then enter in, like real world experiences. Ness, like your girlfriend, I have predominantly been with men, and I've had experiences where friends assume that I'm a lesbian, or assume that I've never been with men, or continue to be attracted with men, and then we'll get into a conversation, and then they'll realize it, and then they kind of give me this look where they're just like, wow, like that changes my whole perspective of you. And I'm thinking, is that a bad thing? Because I don't know what's going through your head right now. Leading to example of a girl I used to date. She was perfectly accepting of me, but halfway through our relationship, she did mention to me that a couple of her friends have basically been telling her that she should not date me because they discovered that I am not a lesbian, and somewhere in that made them feel like, oh, no, this is looking like it's a bad idea for you. You shouldn't be with this person. And it's like, based on what?
And I think it gets really complicated because, I have quite a few lesbian friends that talk about compulsive heterosexuality. And especially I think for, I can't speak on that personally, but I think that from what I understand, a lot of women experience this kind of expectation around, your sexuality or lack thereof, or like you're heterosexual, it's presumed. And I think that, you know, that also then, unfortunately, because we live in the system, it creates a toxic environment within the queer sphere as well, where people get really defensive in a way that, like, and I agree with you, Jay, it's like, you don't need to be. I am not the threat. I am trying to live authentically as myself. I am trying to be authentic and true to myself with you. And I want to share that with you. And so I feel like we need to be more uplifting as queer people for however people, you know, as long as it's not harming anyone else, the way that you live and the way that you choose to self-identify, that is yours to choose. And whether that, you know, and unfortunately, one of those byproducts, you know, if you're looking at this show, it is that for some people, it is not safe to be open and out. And so they will choose the closet. And then it becomes a question of you as a person who maybe is in a relationship with that person. Can you cope with that? Because you have to be true to what you need, right? But ultimately, forcing other people out or putting them in a situation where they're not safe is not the solution either. So, you know, it's very complicated, but I think that, you know, we try to, and I think especially on this podcast as well, we try to approach things with nuance.
We really wanted to touch on the environment that Ilya has grown up in Russia and how that kind of maybe, you know, shapes his personality and the way that he kind of hit the struggle that he has with which the relationship that he's trying to have with Shane. So Elena, if you could kind of lay the groundwork for the history of LGBTQ rights in modern Russia.
It's more like I wanted to give an overview of how things were arriving to the Olympic Games in Sochi, because I remember it so clearly. There were months and months of protests and arrests and detentions and even torture for people. When Putin won the elections in 2012, and in 2013 they made a ban to forbid any display of LGBTQ symbols that were susceptible of being seen by children, which means anywhere in effect. And there were massive protests. That's the time where Pussy Riots. Have you ever heard of Pussy Riots? This collective of women, queer women protesting for LGBTQ rights and for more democracy. They were detained. They were put in jail. And all of this is happening right before the Olympic Games. They were calls to boycott them. There were calls to change the venue and bring the Olympic Games to a place that was more sure for anyone, everyone. And there were even many artists that came out as a way of making themselves visible. And that's the atmosphere that Ilya is living in that moment. I don't think it's clear enough in the show how hard it was. It was years that we had been seeing how the opponents Putin died in the most mysterious ways, not only in Russia, but in England and in other countries. Was this feeling that anyone who dared to oppose him in any way could be susceptible to be killed? And Ilya, as Russian, as queer Russian, coming back with all this baggage, and then his family situation, it's like I don't even understand how he could play. And I look at it because I was curious. Russia indeed finished fifth in the Olympic Games, so we can obviously know that Putin was mad about it. On top of everything else.
I think that it kind of it really illustrates how, like, the reality for different, you know, queer people looks different in different countries. Mm-hmm. And I think that, you know, it's a privilege to live in a place that doesn't, like we're not, there's not a constant threat of violence as a queer person. And I think that, in that way, it's so lovely to see these kind of stories that talk about queer joy, because I think that unfortunately we live in a world that, is quite dark and grim in a lot of ways for us right now. But I also do appreciate that they don't shy away from highlighting that. And I think that, the way that they sort of bookend Scott's episode with Sachi as sort of the framework, even though his struggles are quite different in the show. He's in the United States. The threat of violence is not maybe his main concern. It's more the impact it will have on the sport and camaraderie and the family that, his chosen family. But it still exists there, right? We don't live in a vacuum. So he is, he is also affected by those things. And I think that Jacob really navigates that beautifully. It doesn't become front and center. It doesn't become all about the misery of being a queer, person. I think he really focuses on the joy of the experience of living true to yourself. But I think that it kind of, expertly navigates the fact that it's not easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, we touched just very briefly on last episode, I think, or maybe we just talked offline about, I found it really interesting to see the layers of privilege that each of them have or lack. I mean, granted, yes, Ilya is a white man, but he is coming from Russia where he has no rights if he were to come out as, I'm dating a man, and the immense pressure that he has to like win and be number one at everything. And when I went back to, rewatch some episodes, I didn't initially see the part where, when after the draft, you see Shane talking with whoever the representative of the Metros and his family, and it's basically positive, but Shane's like, no, but I went second. And so Shane's dealing with the fact that he is of a minority, that second is not going to be enough. I have to be the best. I have to be perfect. It's not enough. But the Metros are happy. His parents are happy, but Shane can't be happy. Versus we have the contrast with Ilya. His dad is telling the Boston exec that like, oh, well, this guy is lazy. Like the dude just went first overall, and you're telling this dude like, oh, but he's going to be a lazy player for you. And Ilya's like telling him, I'm going to work very hard for you, sir. And it's not convincing his dad. So he has this extra pressure. And then going back to Sochi, where Shane sees Ilya up in the rafters, like he's aware that now, since Vaughn brought it up about being, in Russia, and it's very brave for someone to be queer here and actually open about it, or potentially open about it. But Shane's still, he's concerned, but he thinks, oh, but this is fine that we're just chatting. And Ilya's like, no, get away from me. We can't even be next to each other. And it's just the way that those two are still trying to figure out each other. So you have, like just these different layerings of lived experience that I find is just so, in queer media, it's like you don't want it to be like spelled out for you, but it's like it's also, they do it in a way where the conversation can get started, and persons who can relate to those experiences see themselves being played out on screen. If you caught our first episode, I definitely did emphasize certain moments in the first two episodes around Yuna, who is Shane's mom, and just the ways within the dialogue and the approaches within the scene are that added layer of Asian representation that Jacob Tierney had spoke about, that he had added into the show. Because when I was thinking back to it, like, we had some discussions about the book where, like, I was kind of rolling my eyes thinking, like, they keep going back to, we can't come out with this relationship because our rivalry. And I'm like, just like, for fuck's sake, like, no one gives a shit about the rivalry. It just kept getting reiterated, but the rivalry. And I'm like, where is the rivalry? Like, I just like, but when you think about it, we had mentioned how Jacob Tierney and the main cast had an interview where the interviewer was East Asian, and she had brought up a good point that even though Shane is told to us that he is half Asian in the book, it didn't resonate with her. And it was the same thing for me. It was more of an afterthought, but I didn't mind it because I'm like, I know we're not focusing on that in this book. But it does make me feel like maybe that should have been another point in there. Maybe that is something that needed to like be emphasized in the book. But it's just like, but we got so much of like, but it's the rivalry. That's why they can't, come public with this. And yeah, there's a little bit of the queerness about it, but the rivalry is the part that's holding them back. And I'm just like, okay, I'm going to give you a pass on this. But moving into the fact that it was an added layering to Shane's story, I think is incredibly important for the TV adaptation. Because so I actually came across this series of photos that were compiled together by Represent Asian Project on Instagram, which is just a platform that compiles all of this great Asian, representation in media, in other outlets and such, and not exactly like hockey based by any means. But so they have this first photo that just says, what is this gay Canadian hockey show that everyone's talking about? And is it Asian? And so we start out with, they've been seeing this buzz about Hudson Williams, who is a Korean Canadian actor who plays half Asian hockey star Shane Hollander. So it's a welcome and wonderful bit of representation, as pro hockey is known for lacking diversity. A 2020 analysis from 538 found that less than 5% of NHL players are Black or people of color. Hockey fans are also overwhelmingly white. The same analysis found that 77.1% of hockey fans are white, and 84% of NHL employees are white. So just thinking like right off the top of my head, the representation within hockey in terms of Asians or anyone who is not white, I mean, yeah, I think back to like Paul Kariya, to like Manny Malhotra, Alexander True, and then, Devin Setaguchi, Nick Suzuki, Jason Robertson, and just recently the Sharks drafted, Haushi Simon Huang, Haushi. Thank you. But it's like, great, we have these handful of folks, but it's still predominantly white in this league. But the moment that you have these folks who come in, it's like it's great that it becomes a great story, but then it also is like on the other side of the coin, it's like, but why is it such a story, right? So similarly, there's not much diversity in romance. The Ripped Bodice, a romance-focused bookstore with locations in Los Angeles and New York, found that just 11% of romance books published in the U.S. were written by BIPOC authors, which is not surprising to me. There's a lot of demasculization of like Asian men and hypersexualization of Asian women. It's basically saying like, these cute petite Asian women are just like so gorgeous, and then these men are, we have like the comic relief, or because certain features are a little more, feminine than, European, features. It's creating this narrative that like Asian men are undesirable. So why would we put them in these romance novels, especially in a lead role? So leading into show creator Jacob Tierney says that hockey and romance's lack of diversity made having an Asian Shane all the more important. At the Toronto premiere for Heated Rivalry, Tierney says that the character's racial identity is a big part of Shane's personality, and that he is this kind of outsider. Quote, I wanted to address his cultural identity and wanted him to talk about it because there aren't that many Asian players in hockey, and it makes the whole thing more interesting. So I had mentioned about representation in lead roles, and success in acting. I mean, this is even like a generational discussion, because I've had it with like my first generation Asian American friends, and me being second generation. Folks who are first gen that come from a predominantly Asian countries have the representation everywhere they look. Their media has their casting folks that look just like them, so they don't really see the struggle like second gen and further along are feeling when we're born in a country where while it may be a mixing pot, or another part of the country may be predominantly white, there's that struggle to understand the perception of why it's such a big deal for second gen and forward on. And even lead roles going to white actors. I don't know if you guys are familiar when Ghost in the Shell was being made. And even though this show is based around a character who's like a cyborg, the name is still Major Motoko Kusanagi. And they casted Scarlett Johansson. I was livid. But again, you listen to someone who is from an Asian country or their first gen, and they don't understand what the big deal is, or they don't see it to the outrage that you do, versus I'm just like, what the actual fuck? Like,
I remember the memes that came out of that too, and now everyone considers as a joke, will say, "Oh, my favorite Asian actor Scarlett Johansson."
Yeah, I remember that too.
Horrible,
so ridiculous.
Because it's like, they're like, oh, well, we're not in a space where we're feeling bold enough to cast some random Asian person who isn't like A-lister. So like, yeah, let's just put Scarlett Johansson in this role. Because, during this time, a lot of, Asian actors who are trying to make it in this business are getting typecasted as the comic relief, or they're a martial artist like Jackie Chan or Jet Li, which I loved their movies, but at a certain point, there's only so many movies with Jet Li being like, oh, he's the rabid, like, killer machine that we've got here in the cage behind us. And I'm like,
I love that movie, by the way.
Right? It's like, oh, I love it, but at the same time, I'm like, no, like, you're more than that. And then more recently in big productions, we are seeing, like Simu Liu, who was cast in Shang-Chi. But I feel like this is not made if MCU was not successful. No one is going to be bold enough to pick a random, who among us knew Shang-Chi before the movie came out? Like, we could have looked it up and I could have gotten excited about it. But if you're just starting out with trying to get people into like comic-based books, I don't think you're reaching for Shang-Chi. And then even like Manny Jacinto in The Acolyte, I loved everything about it. Unfortunately, it got canceled. But even then, he's still struggling with getting typecasted and in just, getting roles in general. And then I also want to make another note about like the 20-year gap between when Crazy Rich Asians was made versus an earlier piece called The Joy Luck Club, which had an all Asian cast, and even then there was discourse within Asian spaces where people were like, oh, well, they casted Henry Golding in the main lead and half white, which is a whole toxic part about, like being Asian enough. So So going back to the Heated Rivalry, at the premiere, Williams shared that his Korean mother was worried that there wouldn't be opportunities for him as an actor. Quote, it scared her because she thought that her being an Asian lady would limit my possibilities for roles I could get because she hadn't seen people like her on the screen. He said. And then when I book a role, due to the fact that it was a prerequisite that I was half Asian, it made her see that things are changing and that there are new opportunities. Tierney and Williams aren't just talking the talk. In Heated Rivalry's steamy first episode, Shane is already reckoning with the weight of representation as one of the sport's biggest stars. He's thinking constantly about what it means for kids to look up to him, especially as an Asian man. His mother, played by Christina Chang, which I do need to note, she is Taiwanese Filipino. And I just thought that was wonderful. Is similarly mindful. She makes it clear to Shane that that he's uniquely positioned to make a splash in pro hockey because he's Asian. The pressures to be positive representation is a major factor behind Shane's constant need to be perfect and scandal-free, both on and off the ice. And then finally, yeah, so this just kind of like goes into the point as well with the book's representation of like Asian identity and the driving narrative about their rivalry, as a reason why Ilya and Shane's relationship need to be kept a secret. So as I mentioned, that kind of like fell flat on me, and I'm just like, we're really just trying to like push it. Like if you have to keep reminding me about it, like, and Shane being Asian and gay while the weight of representation on his shoulders is more realistic.
Yeah, well, as someone who is obviously not Asian, and coming into this and seeing it, like, I didn't pick up that Shane was Asian from the get-go until they mentioned it explicitly in the show. You don't really feel any of the cultural impact in anything that he does. It feels very whitewashed if they're trying to make the point that he's Asian. It does feel like an afterthought, which, again, like you mentioned, is not something that needs to be, like, prominent, I guess, in this story, because that's not the focus. The focus is the gay parts, right? Like, how hard it is for them to navigate them being queer and all this in a hockey world. But I feel like if you wanted to add the fact that he is Asian in this series, it could have been done better.
You
mean on screen or
on screen? On screen. I didn't read the book. I'm just.
Yeah.
I actually think they've done a good job in comparison to what they had in the book, because it doesn't actually, outside of them mentioning it initially, nothing within the book makes me feel that he's Asian. And the fact that they kept going on about, but the rivalry is the reason why we can't come out publicly with this. And the way that Jacob Tierney did make a point of making that a layering in the TV show, I actually think that they do a pretty good job. And it makes me kind of think about, they don't mention this part, but it makes me consider, like, I'm assuming that Yuna is possibly second generation Canadian Asian, and Shane is third, because just the conversations that I've had with other friends who are like third, fourth, fifth generation, like, we have intersecting similarities, but I am much closer to the the immigrant family experience and the divide of like the clashing of the upbringing of Filipino Chinese culture, and then being a child of two worlds and navigating that. And so I feel it a little bit with Yuna and Shane. And I don't think they try to like, but remember Shane's Asian on the TV show, but I don't think that needs to happen the way that they have inserted it here and there in the show. I think makes it so much better than the experience that I had reading the books and the lack thereof.
Okay.
because I do think it should be an important part of his journey because it's realistic.
Right.
In the book,
He's
it's more like
frustrated that he's gone second overall, which should be a great thing, but he's just like, no, but I need to be the best because of who I am.
Okay. I see that.
All right. So that pretty much concludes everything that we wanted to get through. We almost made it through before Phil had to go. But if you made it this far, we are so thankful that you stuck around with us. And if you were there for the first episode, we're also extra glad that you stuck around for this one. And if you're new, welcome. Thanks for making us a small part of your day. And we hope that you enjoy the discussions that we had here today. And we are looking forward to continuing to cover the show. We have 3 more episodes left, and I can't wait to see what happens. Honestly, I just really love all the different levels and types of queerness that we're getting to see, and because we're not a monolith, like and it's just fun.
I hate waiting for the episodes though. Like what year are we living in?
that was my childhood.
No, I understand. I grew up like that too. We're in 2025 and I'm used to binge watching everything now. I just want to see it all.
It's okay.
I guess in our case it's great. So we can talk about it.
That's true. Yeah. That's true.
That's true.
All right. True. On the bright side.
Can you imagine if we had to like cover the whole thing? It would be here like all day. We would definitely have to chop it up and then find some way to like slowly,
Yeah.
get people listening and watching. But yeah, I really am looking forward to what happens next because, we get the little taste of Scott and Kip, and then we're heading back to the main storyline. And I'm assuming, book spoilers alert if we haven't already spoiled you already. I'm interested to see how Shane goes about things with Rose.
Oh, I had completely forgotten.
No spoilers! No spoilers!
Not it. We'll see.
It'll be interesting, and I'm not trying to like make fun of him, being with a woman necessarily, but it's just there's just parts of the book where it's just like, and if he didn't already know that, he's not swinging this way, he definitely knows now.
Pushing.
All right. Any closing thoughts before we head out?
No. Stay gay.
No? All right. So thanks again for joining us, and go ahead, like, subscribe, leave us a comment, let us know anything that you would love to hear us talk about for the next episode, for like a deep dive topic. And yeah, just like share this episode with anyone else who you feel would be interested in
gay hockey.
Yeah, all of it. All right. So thanks everyone for joining me yet again, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Take care.
Bye.